All right, let's do this. Time for a deep dive into Hegel. Now, from the sources you gave me, this guy sounds like a real head-scratcher. Some people call him brilliant, some not so much.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those thinkers who sparks a lot of debate.
For sure. So, what we need to figure out is this. Why do some people think he's the father of pseudo-thinkers, while others see him as like this groundbreaking philosopher?
Yeah.
And you mentioned before that his writing can be kind of tough to get through.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me, what makes it so hard to read? Is it even worth trying to understand?
Okay, so first off, Hegel isn't exactly known for writing in plain English.
Yeah.
And about that father of pseudo-thinkers label, it doesn't actually mean he was intentionally trying to trick people. It's more that his work is super easy to, well, misinterpret and misuse, unfortunately.
Interesting.
To really get why people say that, we got to look at some of the criticisms. So criticism number one is that his language is just insanely dense and abstract. It's like he's writing in code sometimes.
All right. Can you decode one of these Hegelisms for us then? Like, give me an example of a sentence that would make someone go, huh?
Okay, how about this? The absolute is the unity of the diverse within the self-reflective process of becoming.
Well, okay. I think I need a diagram for that one.
Yeah, it's definitely not bedtime reading, and that complexity is a big part of the criticism. Some people say he could have said what he meant way more clearly.
Makes sense.
Which leads to accusations that it's all just intellectual showboating, you know?
But couldn't you also argue that maybe he needed that complex language? Like maybe he needed it to explain some truly groundbreaking ideas. If it were easy to explain, maybe it wouldn't be so revolutionary, right?
That's a good point, actually. It's like trying to explain quantum physics, but only using everyday words.
Exactly.
Sometimes you need new words, new concepts, if you want to grasp these big new ideas.
I see what you mean.
Another big criticism is that Hegel focused so much on these super abstract concepts, things like absolute spirit, that it makes his work feel disconnected from the real world.
Okay, so what is absolute spirit exactly? It sounds pretty intimidating, to be honest.
You can think of it like a universal consciousness, a kind of collective mind that connects all of us and pushes history forward.
Okay,
Yeah, it's a pretty heady concept.
that's one way to put it.
And because it's so abstract, critics say it's just too easy to misinterpret and misapply.
Right, if something is vague enough, you can pretty much make it mean whatever you want.
Exactly.
That's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, and that's where things get really worrying.
Yeah?
Remember how one of your sources mentioned Hegel's concept of historical progress?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this idea has been used to support some seriously messed up ideologies.
Oh, wow.
For example, some authoritarian regimes used Hegel's ideas to claim that their oppressive system was the inevitable outcome of history, like it was a necessary step towards some perfect future.
So they're basically using Hegel to justify their actions, making it seem like there's no other way things could have gone.
Exactly. And that's incredibly dangerous.
Right.
But it is important to remember, just because someone misuses an idea, it doesn't make the original idea bad. It's like blaming the guy who invented the hammer because someone used it as a weapon, you know?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. It makes sense. But it does bring us back to the question of Hegel's writing style, though. One of your sources actually called it empty verbiage, which is pretty harsh. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, it's true that Hegel's vagueness can sometimes feel like, well, an invitation to sophistry. Like people are just using fancy words to sound smart without actually saying anything meaningful.
Right.
But I also think we got to consider the possibility that maybe that vagueness, maybe it's just reflecting how complex the stuff he's talking about really is.
So maybe it's not that his ideas are empty, but that they're just so profound that they're really hard to simplify.
Exactly. It's like trying to sum up the entire universe in a single tweet.
Right.
It just wouldn't do it justice.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty strong criticism of Hegel, but I'm guessing there's got to be another side to this story.
Oh, there definitely is.
What do his defenders see in his work? What makes them overlook all these problems we've been talking about?
Hegel supporters argue that, yeah, his work is challenging, no doubt. But they also say it offers incredibly rich and rewarding insights. Insights into, well, the nature of reality, history, even ourselves.
That sounds interesting.
And to understand those insights, we have to go deeper into his philosophy. We have to start with his idea of a unified understanding of everything.
All right, let's dive into that. I'm starting to get curious about what this Hegel guy had to say. All this controversy makes me think there must be something there worth exploring.
There is.
Okay, so this unified understanding of everything, that sounds pretty ambitious, even for a philosopher.
It is. It
Yeah.
really is, I mean. Hegel wanted to come up with a system that could explain not just like little pieces of reality, but how it all fits together. History, art, politics, religion, you name it.
The whole shebang.
Exactly. He truly believed everything is connected,
Yeah.
and that there's this underlying logic to the way the world works.
It's like he was trying to build this massive philosophical jigsaw puzzle, where each piece is like a different part of human experience.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And his supporters would argue that even if he didn't, perfectly finish the puzzle, just the fact that he tried is super valuable.
I can see that.
He gives us a framework for thinking about these big, important questions and connects ideas that seem totally unrelated at first glance.
That's cool, but how does that translate to something, practical?
Mm.
I mean, I love a good, grand philosophical vision, don't get me wrong, but I also want something I can use in my everyday life with all its, challenges.
No, that's where Hegel's most famous idea comes in, the dialectic. One of the articles you sent mentioned the dialectic as a problem-solving tool.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It definitely caught my eye. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure I totally grasped how it works.
It's actually pretty simple once you break it down. Think of it as a three-step process.
Yeah.
You start with a thesis, your initial idea. Then you run into its opposite, the antithesis. But instead of just rejecting one or the other, you got to try to synthesize them, find a new understanding that includes the best parts of both.
So it's not about one side being right or wrong. It's about creating something new from the tension between opposing forces.
You got it. And the thing is, this isn't just some abstract philosophical game. It's happening all the time, everywhere in the real world. Remember that documentary you mentioned about AI development?
Yeah.
The early fears about AI, remember? They led to people calling for strict regulations, right? That's your thesis.
Right, yeah. The whole concern that AI could become a threat to humanity.
Exactly. But then that push for regulation, it actually sparked innovation in AI safety. Researchers and developers started focusing on creating ethical guidelines and safeguards and all that, which led to a whole new generation of AI systems, ones that are way more aligned with, human values.
So that's the synthesis then.
Bingo. It emerged from that clash between the initial fear of AI and the response it provoked.
Wow, that is a perfect example of the dialectic in action. Like the initial conflict actually led to a better, more nuanced outcome.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of the dialectic. It's this amazing framework for understanding how progress happens, how ideas evolve, and how even opposing forces can actually lead to growth and innovation.
It's like instead of hitting a wall when you have two opposing viewpoints, you use the dialectic to find a way through a more creative and productive way forward.
Exactly. And that's one of the big reasons why, Hegel is still relevant today. Despite all the criticism, his philosophy gives us a way of thinking about the world that embraces complexity, contradiction, the constant change.
Okay, I'm starting to see why people find Hegel so appealing. But what about that whole thing about his ideas being too vague, too easy to misuse?
Yeah, no, that's a valid concern for sure. It's something we got to keep in mind. When we engage with, any complex system of thought, really, Hegel's work is definitely open to interpretation, and that can be both good and bad.
So how do we avoid misinterpreting him then? Or misusing his ideas?
I think the key is to approach his work with a critical mindset. Don't just accept whatever interpretation you hear.
Yeah.
Read his stuff carefully. Really wrestle with those ideas and come to your own conclusions.
It sounds like you're saying we should all be active participants in the dialectic, not just passive observers.
Exactly. Engaging with Hegel shouldn't be about finding easy answers or, sticking to one single interpretation. It's about embracing the process of questioning, challenging, refining our understanding. And that can be incredibly stimulating, both intellectually and personally.
I love that you're emphasizing that. It's a good reminder that we all need to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with ideas that could be, misused.
Absolutely. And it's something we need to keep in mind as we move into the last part of our deep dive. Because now that we've explored both the criticisms and the defenses of Hegel, it's time to tackle the big question. What is his legacy? And why should we even care about this guy centuries later?
So we've looked at both sides now, right? Hegel as the father of pseudo-thinkers, and Hegel as this, brilliant, even if challenging thinker. So where does that leave us? What's his legacy, really? Why should we care about this guy centuries later?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think Hegel's legacy is it's proof that ideas have power, even or maybe especially when they're complex and controversial like his.
It's funny, we started this whole deep dive trying to figure out if he was a genius or a fraud, But now it feels like those labels just don't really fit.
Yeah, I agree. It's like trying to describe, I don't know, the entire universe using one word. Hegel's work is just too vast, too many layers. You can't just put it in a neat little box.
It's like that article you shared, the one that compared reading Hegel to climbing a mountain. It's tough, it's demanding, but the view from the top is supposed to be amazing.
Exactly. And even if you don't reach the peak, the journey itself can be incredible. You're pushing yourself, seeing new things, getting new perspectives.
That actually makes me think of something. We've talked about how Hegel's work is open to different interpretations, that people can read the same thing and come away with different conclusions. So, how do we know we're not just reading our own biases into his work?
That's a really important question, and honestly, it applies to any philosophical text, not just Hegel. It's like that optical illusion you mentioned in your notes, the one where the same image can look like a rabbit or a duck.
Oh, right. It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. The image itself doesn't change, but what we see does. And that's why it's so important to be critical when reading Hegel. Question your own assumptions. Be open to the possibility that there could be multiple valid interpretations.
So it's not about finding the one right answer. It's about being open to the process of asking questions, debating,
Yeah.
and constantly refining our understanding.
Exactly. And I think that is maybe the most valuable thing Hegel left us with. This idea that knowledge isn't fixed. It's this dynamic process of questioning, challenging, refining our understanding. Through discussion and debate.
That takes us back to the dialectic, doesn't it? This idea of creating new insights from the tension between different viewpoints.
It all comes full circle. Hegel's philosophy is all about embracing complexity, recognizing that truth isn't usually found in easy answers. It's in that struggle with difficult questions.
It's been quite a journey, this deep dive into Hegel.
Mm-hmm.
We've dealt with dense language, abstract concepts, some pretty controversial interpretations.
Yeah.
But we've also discovered some really insightful ideas about reality, history, the importance of critical thinking. I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from this is that engaging with Hegel, it pushes you to become a more active, more engaged thinker. It's a challenge, yeah, but it's also super rewarding.
And even if you disagree with some of what Hegel said, just wrestling with his ideas can make you a sharper thinker. Broaden your intellectual horizons.
So to everyone listening out there, if you're up for a real philosophical workout, Hegel is your guy. Just be ready to use those brain muscles.
And don't be afraid of the challenge. After all, to quote Hegel, maybe, the truth is a process, not a destination.
Words to live by. Until next time, keep those minds thinking. Happy deep diving, everyone.